Welcome into the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Wednesday, March the 19th. I'm Zach Ewing with our Times-Picayune Saints beat writers Matthew Paris and Luke Johnson. Another little cozy three-man show today where we talk about how properly seeded Louisville was in the NCAA tournament, among other topics. I thought an 8 seed was fair.
An 8 seed was incredibly fair, and we don't have anybody to push back against that.
That's right. In fact, I think they were lucky to get in.
Yeah, I agree.
So take that, Jeff. No,
Go Wildcats.
Our group chat was completely inundated with Jeff Duncan complaining about Louisville's seed. Maybe we'll make a Final
Sending
Four
a bunch
pick at
of
the end of the show.
confirmation bias tweets. You know.
He was on one. But unfortunately, he's covering horse racing this morning as a Louisville guy, and so he's not here. But we do have a lot to talk about. We kind of looked at this as an opportunity, guys, to, the league year started exactly a week ago. Maybe just take stock of what the Saints have done so far. It's tough to give them a grade because I think, it's got to be incomplete at this point. Obviously, you see, it's incomplete until after the draft, really. But we can at least take stock of what they've done. Some of our favorite under the radar moves, Matt, and just the direction they appear to be going.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've done a nice job of being aggressive in certain areas and still kind of holding back in others. I mean, with their salary cap situation, it's a tricky balance to pull off, but they've been able to do so. I really like the Justin Reed signing. That's not necessarily under the radar, but I think it went and filled a key weakness for them. And so, yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's still other weaknesses on the roster, but that's what you have the next few months for.
I think, but we're also going to talk about Cam Jordan's decision to come back and actually help the Saints out, which I think is a key piece of this too. But Luke, the question coming into the offseason, no matter who the coach was going to be, are the Saints going to continue to go for it, or are they going to finally reach for the reset button? We've gotten our answer on that, at least.
Yeah, and I think we all would have been foolish to just assume they were going to blow it up, right? It's just not in their DNA. But I have been, I think, pleasantly surprised, I guess, if that's the right word for it, with the amount of moves they've done. They were never going to be the team shopping at the top of the market, but they did tell us back at the Combine that they were going to be more active in free agency this year, and that's turned out to be true. So yes, I think they still have a lot of room to go to get this roster to where it could legitimately really compete for something. But they do have the room to do it. The options are a lot more limited than they were a week ago, but there are still some players out there you can add, and I think the pieces that they've added so far have been pretty good for a team that's perennially in this position of quote unquote cap hell.
Yeah. So let's take stock of what they have done. They traded for Devon Godshaw. They brought back Chase Young, Juwan Johnson. They added Eric Reed, obviously.
Justin Reed.
I did the same.
Yeah, I'm gonna continue to do that. Justin Reed, the younger non-LSU player who is still playing, importantly. And they leaving the Saints have been Jamal Williams, Peyton Turner,
Paulson
Adebo is probably your key one there. So I don't know. I mean, I think the Saints are probably a little better than they were a month ago, Matt. No, I guess Adebo.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the show, but I do think they're a little bit better, right? And if they could be a little bit healthier, then you can expect some improvement over last year. But I do still think that this is a flawed roster, right? They took incremental steps and they're hoping for better health, but I think they still need to do more to be able to combat injuries. That was a big thing last year. They weren't deep enough to deal with the injuries. So, I mean, it's obviously it's March. So much still has to happen. The team hasn't even taken one step on the practice field yet. We have no idea how this new scheme is going to implement or change things. the new coaching staff, new vibes in the building, all that stuff. Like that all might be really, really good. It all might blow up in their face. Like we just don't know. But I do think that just from a pure roster standpoint, they are incrementally better than they were at the tail end of last year.
Yeah. I was going to say, there is some risk with this approach. I mean, once again, they are betting that a coaching staff can fix things. After the 23 season, when they underwhelmed, I said, all right, we're going to scrap the offensive staff, bring in a new one. I would say that worked through and through. I mean, they had a lot of injuries, but the offense was generally better when everyone was healthy. And then they looked at the coaching situation last year and decided to make changes, and they mostly kept the same group. The surprising thing to me is, I mean, there's Derek Carr, but the way that they've approached the defensive line, that's the one I really need to see after the draft. How is it going to look different? Because bringing back guys like Nathan Shepard, Colin Saunders, even Chase Young to some extent, though I understand more that one, that's keeping the group mostly the same, even though that really underwhelmed. Like, if that group was a lot better, I think the defense would be better.
Right. I totally agree. I think they, just in the trenches generally last season, were a below average team to bad team. So it is a little bit surprising from my standpoint, seeing them just kind of run the same group back on the defensive line. But that's the sort of thing where it's this new staff is coming in. I think those guys did play a lot better after the midseason coaching change and having Brian Young.
Guy McGuy.
So maybe there's some untapped potential there, but I agree with Matt. I'm surprised that they just decided to kind of run that back, because I thought that was an area of the roster that could probably use some turnover based off of last year's performance.
Yeah. So again, grading this is a little bit of a fool's errand at this stage. It almost officially has to be incomplete, because you got 5 picks in the top 120 of the draft. Like, it's going to be a huge referendum on this offseason, what they get out of that draft next month. So, and obviously still have some money to spend. What, almost $20 million in cap space right now?
It's almost 30. Actually.
It's almost, okay, because of Cam's restructure, it's almost $30 million, and so a lot could still be done. But just as of right now, if you had to grade the first week and the approach the Saints have taken, and then we'll dive specifically into what we liked and didn't like. Where are you going, Luke?
Yeah, I'd give it a solid B. I'm coming around on the Justin Reed signing. I think he immediately improves their secondary, especially with the way Staley likes to use his players, where they're kind of versatile, and you can play in multiple positions. That's one of Justin Reed's calling cards. I like the Chase Young re-signing. I like the move for Godshaw. It was kind of a low risk move, trading a late round pick for him, for somebody who's kind of been a proven run defender. I looked it up on NFL Pro. He ranked top 10 among all defensive linemen last year in run stops, which is like defined as a stop that is considered a successful play for the defense, like negative EPA play. So I think he had 50 of them last year. It was like number 9 in the NFL. That's something they were sorely missing.
It's one of those guys that good defenses have, and you never know their name.
Correct. Yeah. And for a team that finished number 31 in the NFL in run defense last year, I think that's a great addition. Low cost, low risk. I'm not as sold on the Juwan Johnson signing. Again, really like Juwan. I hope I'm wrong. But that just seemed kind of rich for me. And basically all the other moves have been the kind of stuff that we're used to with the team. Signing guys who are bottom of the roster guys, who are role player guys, guys who, like Will Clapp, might come in really handy, but I don't think they're counting on him to be their starting left guard. So, I think from what we've seen so far, I think a B is probably the right move. I don't think there's anything that I really hated, but I think there's stuff that I question in there.
If Will Clapp is the starting left guard, that grade goes down. But what do you have right now?
Yeah, I'll go B-. I think the moves are fine in a vacuum outside maybe the Juwan Johnson thing, but it's really the strategy, I think, is why I'm knocking it down slightly because, maybe it's unrealistic to think, but I still thought there was an avenue where you could get out of Derek Carr and then try and piecemeal it by resetting a year and still trying to be competitive. I didn't necessarily think you had to go the full, acknowledging that they didn't want to do a full teardown, but you could sign someone cheaper at quarterback and try and go that route and see what you did. But, they want to bring back Derek Carr, and we'll see. But I just think, again, I wonder if they're questioning how good this team really is. But
I think that's a good way to put it. It's in a vacuum, the moves are fine. What I question is, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
You're essentially bringing back what's very close to the same roster. Like Justin Reed is a good player. Is he going to all of a sudden make you a playoff team by himself? No. So you've essentially brought back the same roster, and you are betting that this coaching staff can bring more out of them in a combination with maybe better injury luck and a draft class and things like that. But that's essentially what you're hoping here. And I think that strategy can rightfully be questioned.
It can. And at the same time, we should know that they're never going to go for the nuclear option, right? That is like under lock and key, and they've thrown away the key.
Right. But that to me, I still think there's a way to balance it. It doesn't have to be an either or. You can have your two timelines sort of thing.
Yeah, we're not talking about blowing it up as much as make a few more changes than you did.
But I mean, I think if you do move on from Derek Carr,
who's going to play quarterback?
Right. I mean, yes, you can sign somebody for a very cheap contract, but for all of Carr's flaws, he's still clearly the best option on this team. I think he's a much better option than anybody you're going to sign for $10 million.
Daniel Jones.
I mean, Daniel Jones signed for
14.
$14 million. Justin Fields got $20 million, and I think those guys are worse quarterbacks than Derek Carr. So if they are going to be at all competitive, I guess the other option would be to draft a quarterback at 9. But you don't know who's going to be there.
Well, and then you're losing the opportunity to draft another position.
Right. And it's just I get the idea of moving on from Carr. I think even on this podcast I said I would personally do it, but when you look at what this team has been and what they're trying to do, I just it never felt like a realistic option there.
Yeah, I mean, not to go down this rabbit hole too much, but in theory, if he was actually open to a trade, which kind of seems like he might have been, you would have massaged the cap hit that way. You would have gained, a third, a fourth round pick on top of the other ones you had. You'd have enough draft ammunition to where if you did want to move up for someone, you could have. You would have had some extra cap. It wouldn't have just been necessarily the 50 outright. And so you could have you could have thrown some money at a quarterback. I think not I'm not saying 20 million, but the 10 to $15 million range. But that's a thing where you're basically the 2022 team then. You're 7-10 maybe, but I'm sure people listening to this would say, well, with Derek Carr, they'll probably be 7-10 too. So that's the point where I'm I don't know what the ceiling of this team is, or even the floor. I think they're still ultimately a 7-10 to 9-8 team.
Yeah, I still think there's a little bit of being blinded by that first 2 weeks last year, and we'll see how much folly there is in that. But let's dive into a couple of specifics. Moves, starting with moves that you all liked. And I know we talked about this last week a bit, but I think that the Chase Young re-signing was pretty much praised across this stage, and the Justin Reed maybe less so. But like you said, Luke, you're coming around. You were probably low man on that. So, I mean, let's talk about moves you liked.
Well, I mean, I really like the Chase Young move. For all the reasons that I've said on the show before, he's still very young. He's 25 years old. He has been a useful player, maybe not the production that you want, but like a good, useful player. And when you're talking about just the compensation across the board, NFL-wise, I mean, he's like barely a top 20 in terms of average annual value on the contract. I think it made a ton of sense. Just because, like, there's still probably more there, especially if he's healthy going into this offseason. He can finally actually have a real offseason. You get him coached by Bo Davis, who I think is recognized kind of across the board as a very good defensive line coach. They've got an edge-specific coach on this roster. I think there's a chance that this deal looks very, very, very good in hindsight. Now, there's also a chance. I mean, he's battled injuries throughout his career. There's a chance he gets hurt, and it looks bad. But I think it was a good gamble on the Saints' part on somebody who I think still at this stage of his career, you can say there's potential for more there.
Yeah, he might even have 15 sacks.
Let's not go that far.
Rod's not even here. He's catching strays. Matt, what did you like?
I said the Justin Reed one because we kind of talked about it earlier. I like the Isaac Yiadom addition. I think it gives the Saints some flexibility there where Alontae Taylor, maybe he's a better slot cornerback than outside now. Like, I wouldn't have said that a year ago, but after seeing him struggle down the stretch of last season, maybe he is more comfortable on the inside, and you can put Yiadom on the outside. I think also Yiadom played really well in 23, and they missed him last year. Like, he's kind of a big physical cornerback that, you know, I know they're not playing that necessarily man-to-man system anymore, but it gives you that option if you need to. And, you know, he knows Brandon Staley not only from San Francisco, but they overlapped in Denver a little bit. Like, I think he can adapt to what they want to do here on defense now, but it also gives them some familiarity and flexibility with this defense. And I would just say, generally, their signings have been a little bit more about flexibility than maybe the last roster.
Side note, can they please just commit to one position for Alontae Taylor? You know?
Yeah.
It's like flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. Like, I want to see him, like, is he a slot? Is he an outside? Make a decision. Put him there. Keep him there.
Yeah, I think NFL teams kind of get in this danger of, oh, my God, he can do so many things, but then they, like, never settle in on what that player is best at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hurt his development, honestly.
I agree.
Yeah, I do.
Because I think he's got traits to be a really good player, and we haven't seen that because when they threw him in 23 as the full-time slot, like, he didn't like practice that until training camp, and then he really struggled, and then they benched him. And then, you know, last year they're like, hey, we have to move you back outside, and then he struggled because he'd been training to be a slot corner. Like, just tell him right now, like, you are our outside corner or you are our slot corner. Prepare that way and stick with it, and don't try to shuffle it because he can do both. Like, I really want to see what he can be if he just, like, full-time focuses on one thing.
By the way, we were going to ask for under the radar additions you liked, and I hope you have another one because Ike Yiadom was mine.
Okay.
And so now I'm like,
Okay.
Well, I
Maybe
want
it wasn't
to
quite
hear
so under the radar.
your take on Yiadom anyway. So we'll revisit that.
It's yeah. I mean, it's similar to Matt. I just think he was a good player in 23. Is he going to be a Pro Bowl starter? No, but he cracked the lineup in 23 that had Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo. Now that those guys are gone, you need depth. And to me, he's not just depth, but he's quality depth, whether he actually plays or he's the third corner or whatever it may end up being.
I mean, they should hope he goes into the season as number 4.
Yeah. But if he's your number 4, you have a good secondary.
And if you need him, then he's a really good option to fall back on. Like, I agree. I think it was a really good signing, especially, you know, he's making, $3 million a year, a little bit more than 3. He's a very, very good depth piece, and he's a superb special teams player, which, like, that can't go, it can't go just unsaid. He's really, really good there. And then he also gives you value in the secondary. I think he's a good player. But, like, they just absolutely cannot go into a season with him as, like, penciled in as a starter.
I mean, have you looked at the depth chart right now?
Well, we've
that's
got a whole
what I'm
draft to go.
saying.
Yeah,
He would start, though, yeah.
Right, and I'm saying they can't do that.
No,
like, they
for
have
sure.
to continue to add there.
that's still one of these holes we keep talking
But
about.
I think if they did, I think he could be like a solid starter.
Yeah, I think
Maybe,
he
yeah.
could be, but he could also be. If
Sure.
he's the guy that everybody's like looking at tape every single week, like I mean, there are flaws there, you know, and he
the
will get
Los
picked
Angeles
on.
Rams game in 23 was absolutely brutal for him.
And to
but
be fair, right now he is not. He's the number 3 corner right now, right? He's behind Kool-Aid McKinstry and Alontae Taylor.
But like that's
But
a
he would
starting
still
corner.
start on the
That's a starting
outside.
corner,
Right.
Yeah, that's.
But when you say he needs to go in as number 4, well, to get him there, all you really need is a new number 3. Like
yeah,
you don't
to
need
draft
anything
someone.
unbelievable.
Yeah, and there's still, the draft is there. I think there's still some like a couple corners on the market who could be starting caliber players, even if they're not like standout corners. Guys who've played a lot of football and can fill that position. Like I don't think it's like a must that they go in and be like, we have to take the best corner at number 9. I think there's other avenues to get a player where you can push Yadam to your number 4.
Okay, moving on to what we did not like as we talk about the holes left on this roster. You guys both hinted at Juwan Johnson. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it.
Yeah, sure.
Like, it's $10 million a year. It just felt like a lot for Juwan, and I don't know what he was talking with other teams about. Maybe that's what they had to pay to get him back in the building, but. I mean, he said it himself. Like it hasn't been consistent enough, and it's been some really, really, really good performances, and then like 3-4 game stretches where he just kind of disappears, and that's not necessarily all his fault. I think they've at times leaned too hard on Olave and Shaheed to really drive their passing game, and Michael Thomas at other times, where the tight ends have kind of just disappeared from the offense. But I mean, just the production has not really merited that kind of contract for me. I thought Foster Moreau had just as good a season as Juwan last year as a receiver, and he's their like traditional Y. He's not their move receiving tight end. So I hope I'm wrong. We've seen it. Like we've seen this potential from him to be like a really big time weapon in a passing game. Kellen Moore knows how to get the most out of his tight ends. We've seen that kind of throughout his coaching career. Maybe he sees that and he thinks he can get more out of Juwan Johnson, but I just I really want to see it before I feel good about that contract.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that was maybe one where you go, was that the best way to spend the little money that you do have? It's not like you can just throw money around.
Yeah,
everywhere.
but I mean, it's going to cost them less this year to keep him than it would have cost him to.
Fair enough.
Like his cap hit, I think it was going to be $6.5 million if he let's say he signed with the Broncos, would have been $6.5 million in dead money, and I think his cap hit now is like what, 4.5 or 5.
Yeah.
So it actually saved them money to bring him back on that, but obviously next year his cap hit's going to they're going to have to do restructures again. And,
right. That's not how you want to do business. Just to say, let's bring this guy back just because he saves us a couple $1 million. I mean,
right. And I don't think that's. I think they like Juwan, right? And yeah, people don't care about this, but I do think he's a good person to have in your locker room. There's other aspects to it beyond what happens between the lines on Sundays, but it still to me just felt rich. That's the only if they would have brought him back at the same APY that he played for in the last deal, $6.5 million a year, I would have felt great about it. But he's like a top 11 tight end in terms of contract, and he's never produced like one.
Right. And I mean, he acknowledged that, and I give him credit. I asked him about, hey, your best games last year were without Chris Olave and Shaheed, thoughts? And he was like, well, I don't want to be the guy that they wait until everyone else is hurt to get the ball. And I think the most concerning thing for him, even after the last time we did this show and we talked about how we didn't like the contract, was he started slow, man, really slow. And you just waiting for him to pay off at the end of the season. His last 2 weeks last year, I was doing math as Luke was talking. He had 146 yards the last 2 weeks of the 24 season, represented about 25% of his total yardage on the season. In 23, he had 130 yards in the last 2 weeks, and that represented 35% of his season total. And so if you're waiting to the last 2 weeks for, a fourth and greater than a third of your total yardage, that's a problem. And then they signed him for $10 million. Like it's a lot to use for a player you hope hits, and he's also entering his 6th season.
To me, he is the poster boy for, hey, this new coaching staff can get more out of these guys. I mean, they must see something in him and say, we can make this work. And if they're not right, it's not going to be a good contract.
Well, I mean, we've all seen it. And you see it in those games, and we've seen it in practices. And I think it's definitely possible, right? But like I keep saying, at some point, it's got to turn into real, tangible, week in, week out, consistent production for that contract to look good.
If he's not the poster boy for that, then the guys who are probably the defensive tackles, and you referenced this too. A little bit strange to have. I mean, there is nothing more demoralizing for a defense than some of those games late in the season where the Saints just could not stop the run. Like, even the bad plays were getting 5 and 6 yards, and the good plays were getting 15 and 16 yards, and there were missed tackles down the field, and it was frankly embarrassing for the Saints defense, the way that that starts with the defensive tackles. And so, to me, yeah, you added Devon Godshaw, but it's surprising that they brought back both Nathan Shepard and Colin Saunders to me. Are you guys on that page?
Yeah, I would wonder if, I don't have the cap mechanics in front of me, but could they be a training camp cut if they don't earn their spot on the roster? I don't know what the dead money is there, but at the very least, I feel like they're going to have to earn their role, and I feel like defensive tackle, that's still a position they could add in the draft. I don't necessarily know if they're done here, given how deep this upcoming draft is at defensive tackle specifically. And so, yeah, I think that's a spot that, even Brian Brzee, who had a really nice season with, 7.5 sacks, he's a question mark against the run, too. So I think we need to see more development from him.
Yeah, for me, if in some magical fantasy land, Mason Graham slips to number 9 in the draft, I'm still taking him.
Oh, yeah,
I would add him to this group in a heartbeat, because I still think this is really the focal point of, are they really just running it back?
Yeah, it's surprising. I don't think those guys have played particularly well for the last 2 seasons. Both their seasons in Saints uniforms. So I don't really know what to say about it. Their run defense is look, and it's not just on the defensive tackles, right?
No.
That's like you alluded to. Their downfield tackling has been really bad. And that a lot of those yards are explosives where there's missed tackles by linebackers or safeties or corners. But the defensive interior is the foundation of your run defense. And it just hasn't been good enough for the last 2 years. And, this is, I think, kind of one of those where you're saying, maybe with the coaching change, a scheme change, maybe that can help. But, it just felt like Godshaw is going to cost him, $5 million this year?
Yeah.
I think that's an area where you can address it at, maybe if not a discount, at a pretty reasonable price. And just the guys they've had in there haven't really been working that well.
Yeah, I would say if we're gonna go silver linings with them returning, they're cheap.
Yeah,
it doesn't cost a lot for the Saints to have them on the roster, and they're okay players. They've done some really good things, like the Colin Saunders interception at Kansas City was really impressive. Him as a fullback in 23 was. Maybe that's something that Kellen Moore will use occasionally if they don't have a traditional fullback on the roster. There are other ways to use these guys, and they've had their moments. I think Nathan Shepard had some nice moments too, but
he did.
It's
about consistency.
Yeah, consistency for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and be back in 30 seconds, and we'll talk about our favorite under the radar moves, and also just whether maybe generally we're more optimistic or not than we were in January. Back right after this on the Saints Insider.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. With quick picks, you can tap right into pre-built ready-to-bet parlays right from the home screen. And if you miss tip-off, no worries. You can play same-game parlays live during the action. Plus, it's never been easier to find and bet on the biggest matchups of the day, so you can keep up with all the action. Caesars Sportsbook, proud partner of the NBA and the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards. Download it today.
We're back on the Saints Insider podcast. This is the Ike Yada Memorial segment here. What your favorite under-the-radar move? I had originally said we're going to eliminate Devon Godshaw because that was the trade, eliminate Justin Reed, and basically anybody the Saints re-signed because those are all going to create headlines. So we're leaving the bottom of the roster moves that you alluded to. What have you liked the most? Matt, we know it was Yadam for you, but if you have another one, feel free.
I look forward to having a training camp fascination with Felvis Jones Jr. of his running back. I feel like that's going to be Mason Tipton 2.0 of, oh my God, look what he does. And then he finishes with like 130 yards in the season.
Yeah. So I was actually going to say Velus Jones too, but I think the thing that I'm intrigued by is his return ability.
Yeah.
Which we saw like a little bit of when he was with the Bears. It's basically the only thing he did with the Bears is a third-round pick. He finished like 290 offensive snaps with them in 3 years. But I think we saw last year that returners can impact games. I think it's probably a good idea for the Saints to maybe scale back Rashid Shaheed in the return game, considering how vital he is to their offense and the injuries he's had in recent years, which obviously it happened on an offensive play, not a special teams play, but I think you're just exposing more injury risk there. I think there's potential he could make the squad on special teams and maybe be an impact player in that way. I don't think I'm going to hold out hope that he's going to be somebody who's going to contribute on offense.
Right.
But I do think that there's an avenue for him to be an important player on this team if those skills like translate to these new return rules, because he didn't really get a chance to do it last year. I think he only played in 3 games last year, 2 games, one with Chicago and one with Carolina. Spent a lot of time on practice squads, but I do think that it's an area where he could potentially impact the game. He's still a young player, like I said. He was a top 75 pick. He's got some ability, but I just don't anticipate we'll see it on the offensive side of the ball.
I'm going to throw out Jonah Williams. This is a spot defensive end. The Saints need depth. He's played on playoff teams the last 2 years, the Lions in 2024, the Rams in 2023. He's a bigger defensive end like the Saints like. I just don't think they have enough of those guys on their roster where you're like, okay, Chase Young is going to get his, Carl Granderson is going to get his, Cam Jordan, who we'll talk about in a minute, hopefully he gets a few. You need the 1s and 2s in there too. You need these guys who rotate in, and every now and then they make a big play, and I think Jonah Williams could be that.
I know he's on the 20. Was he in 2020 with Staley? I mean, there's maybe some familiarity there.
Let's see. I have this up here.
I know he was on the 21 Rams team, but was he on 20?
He was not.
Okay, never mind then. Strike that from the show.
Well, he actually, I take that back. He was, but he was on the practice squad in 2020.
Like I said, the familiarity with Brandon Staley is just one thing after another. Yeah, it's a solid piece. If he's a rotation guy, we'll see if he even makes the team. But this is like the other moves that they made. I don't know if those guys are shoo-ins for the roster. Like there were a lot of guys. There are a few guys last season that they signed that ultimately didn't make the roster. I'm thinking of the Raiders tight end specifically, not Jacobson, but the other guy. Who am I?
You've forgotten his name already.
I have Kevin Meyer.
No idea. Dude, you're asking me to remember one of the 120 players they had in training camp last year.
It's not going to work here anymore anyway.
I do want to say that I kind of, if the Saints have to be in a position where they're leaning on either of these guys, they probably have a problem. But I do think it's a good idea to have Landon Young back on a 1-year deal, have Will Clapp here on a 1-year deal. 2 guys that have been pretty versatile players throughout their career. Landon Young's played snaps at 4 positions on the line. Will Clapp can give you some center guard flex. That stuff ends up being important, like we saw last year. It's just offensive line is often kind of like you're kind of shuffling the deck there. So having some versatility there is good. I think Clapp probably gives you just about as good a play as Lucas Patrick did last year. So, I think while they're definitely not done there, they don't have a starting left guard on the roster at the current moment. I do think having some guys with some versatility back on the offensive line is good.
Yeah, you hate to just say you need warm bodies there, but you need people who can fill in a pinch.
You need people who have look. Both those guys have a lot of experience. Clapp's played in 70 games. He's got 15, 20 starts under his belt. Landon Young's about the same, and have done it at a lot of different positions. Again, I don't think you want to be in a position where you're counting on those guys to play like starting level snaps, but they're valuable players to have on the roster.
Okay, so let's put a bow on this discussion, and then we'll wrap things up with a little Cam Jordan talk. But the question is, compared to when did the Saints play the Bucs? January 5th? Is that compared to January 6th, the day after they played the Bucs, to now, March the 19th, are you more or less optimistic about the 2025 New Orleans Saints? They have hired Kellen Moore and his staff, Brandon Staley as defensive coordinator. They've made these moves we've been talking about. But as we said, mostly it's the same team. So I'm going to guess it hasn't changed a lot, but are you more or less optimistic?
Like if there's, the gauge here, I'm like shaded just a little. I'm like 51%, instead of unsure, like a little bit more on the optimistic side. Just because I mean, they can't have the same, right? They can't have the same level of offensive injuries they did last year, right? I think if you have your starting quarterback for close to 17 games, if not all 17, if you have at least one of your two stud wide receivers, you're going to see some improvement on that side of the ball, especially with Kellen Moore running the offense. I think I'm still in huge wait and see mode on the defense. I think they've got pretty close to their starting 11 there. Maybe another addition or two to get there, but they're not going to change out much on the defensive line. They're not going to change out much, if anything, on linebackers. I think the secondary is still a little unsettled, and that's mostly the same unit that really underperformed last year. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, but I think they'll be better on offense, and I think I'm kind of back in this hey, maybe they can compete for a division title in a weak division.
Matt?
Yeah, I would say the same. I think the process, as long as the coaching search dragged out, it was a good process to hire Kellen Moore. He built a strong staff. They've made these improvements. They've made these changes that should be improvements, but I still am a little skeptical given that it's mostly the same roster. I'd go slightly more optimistic, but little to no chance. I am whelmed, not under or over.
Here's the way I would put it. I think that adding variance is a good thing. Because on January 6th, we would all have looked at each other and said, this team is bad, and they're going to be bad, and if they run it back, I don't even want to watch this crap for another year. But by adding a young head coach who has been universally praised across the league for his play calling, for the way that he deals with players, and a staff, a defensive coordinator who's been a head coach in the league, a staff full of young guys coming from the college ranks, I don't know. Maybe they're going to be really bad. Maybe it's going to be a total disaster. But because they've changed something, maybe it will be better. And I think adding variance is a good thing because otherwise our default was they're going to be bad. And now I'm less certain of that.
I think the cultural reset is maybe important too. Yeah, they've had the same voices in that building forever. And they still do in the front office, but I think from the coaching staff, from the tone they set, I think that's going to be important. Again, they are bringing back much of the same roster, but when you're bringing in a new set of eyes to look at it, to operate practices a little bit differently, to operate just the day to day in a different way, I think that might have a positive impact. And look, we're going to get a real good sense on what Dennis Allen was as a head coach too, right? if they go out and they win 10 games with this roster, we're going to say, okay, well, Dennis Allen wasn't cut from the head coach cloth.
Yeah.
Right.
I can say that now without watching it.
Right. But like everybody thinks they know that right now. Right. Everybody's like, well, they lost 7 straight games. He's been bad at 2 spots as a head coach. But like they could certainly go out there and really, really struggle with Kellen Moore and an all-star staff this year. And you can say, okay, well, the roster has giant problems, and this is now your wake-up call. You know, I think that is something that we're going to get a referendum on this year.
Yeah, I think it could be both, though. I mean, I think Dennis Allen should be graded by what he had as a coach in those games. I mean, he had almost 3 seasons worth of evidence that he wasn't necessarily the guy, and I think he can still be a smart football coach. Like, I think he's a really smart defensive coach. I just don't know if he was equipped to lead and all those other sorts of things. And that's what we'll see with Kellen Moore.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get to here. I think the results have spoken for themselves. I'm not going to look past the results.
Right.
Well, his tenure with the Raiders, his tenure with the Saints. Well below a 500 record as a head coach. But like I do think that the bringing in a new set of eyes as somebody who I think a lot of people are excited to see as a head coach, maybe that results in some positive steps forward for this roster, this team. And if there isn't some, then I think that's a signal to the front office and to the leadership within the Saints organization that the roster is indeed a problem. It's not just coaching staff.
Close games, and maybe this is a whole podcast at some point this summer. But like Dennis Allen, you wrote the story. Luke lost like 75% of 1-possession games in his coaching career. That's like the second worst mark in the NFL over the last 15 years. If you could just make that 50-50, which by default you would think you'd win 50% of your close games and lose. If you could make it 50-50, Dennis Allen's probably still coaching here because he probably made the playoffs one of those years. And if you could just change that, you're probably in much better shape. So I don't think it's quite as dire as maybe we thought it was on January 6th. So I'm with you guys. It doesn't make it good.
Clip that line out.
That doesn't make it good.
Oh God.
Well.
Yeah. All right.
On January 7th.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. We felt the same way on January 7th. Not a politics podcast. Okay. Cam Jordan, save us, please. Cam Jordan is one of the voices that Kellen Moore will be counting on in this locker room. And I think Cam Jordan, look, he did what everybody wanted Derek Carr to do and said, yes, I will come back for less money because I didn't get the job done, but I want to be here. That's pretty rare, especially at the level he did it at. I mean, he saved the Saints $10 million under the cap. That's Justin Reed. That's a lot of savings. So what do y'all think the motivation was here, and what can we expect from Cam going forward in 2025?
Okay. So first of all, I think Kat Terrell of ESPN reported is not likely to be earned incentives on that, right? So those are based off of recent production. And I think those are attainable, so he could get some money back on that contract. And then I also think that maybe there was a frank discussion to be had about like what actually was realistically out there for a 35-year-old defensive end who's coming off a couple down seasons, combined with the fact that he's obviously established roots here in New Orleans. All of his kids were born here. He's got his whole foundation, and it's really important for him, I think, to be like his dad and spend his entire decade-plus long career in one place. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I do think like we shouldn't be discounting that. Like if he was out on the open market, there probably wouldn't be a robust market for him. So he did the Saints a huge favor. He's going to probably, if he plays to the level he thinks he can play, he's going to probably earn some of that money back, and also he gets to, continue tying himself to this place that has been very important in his life.
Do you think that if the Saints, if Cam had not agreed to take this pay cut, that a release was on the table?
I don't know. I don't know what they would have done because that would have been a pretty tough pill to swallow from a cap perspective. Like his cap number was like 21 million. It would have been like 23 million if they'd released him because of all the dead money.
Is that with the post-June one, though? Because they still have one of those
They
spots
could have done it.
available.
They could have done a post-June one, but like again, that's like doing nothing to help them this year. So it would have been. I don't know. Saints didn't have like a ton of leverage there. I mean, I guess they would have if they would have said like, well, I guess you're going to not continue your career here if that's what you really want to do. But they wouldn't have really recouped much.
They had more leverage than they did with Carr, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no doubt about it.
I mean, yeah, I think that's the biggest difference is Derek Carr is coming off a lot better of a season than Cam Jordan was. I think Cam hit his stride late last year after the coaching change. They settled into a bit of a role that was more agreeable for him. But the first half of the season, it was ugly at times. But I think Cam deserves credit for taking a pay cut the way he did. And yeah, maybe he didn't have the options elsewhere. Like, would he have earned $6 million even elsewhere? Probably not, but it makes sense. I mean, I think both. It was good to see both sides reach like it's a smart solution for both parties.
Does Cam Jordan play more or less snaps than he did last year in 2025?
I'm going to put it at even. I right about 50% of the snaps. Right, that's about what he played last year, which was a career low. But I would expect it to be kind of similar.
If they draft an edge rusher in the first round, I would go less. If they don't, about the same.
But he might be like their like 5 technique, and he might be somebody who's still playing. What I'm saying is like they might draft an edge rusher who's a completely different type of player than Cam.
Like in base,
right?
He could be out there for rundowns.
Yeah, I mean,
I would get he finished last year at 48%. I'll go about 40%.
Right.
Of the percentage.
So he's no longer a starter, right? I mean, I know on the defensive line you're rotating all the time anyway. He may actually start the game, but he's not going to get a starter level of.
Well, like Cam was an outlier for much of his career because he never left the field. That rarely happens. So like I don't think he's that player anymore. Right? I don't think he's going to be playing 85-90% of the snaps anymore.
He hasn't been.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. But I do think that there's still a chance he plays like 50.
Yeah.
All right. We will keep our ear to the ground on more news on the Saints as they continue here in this free agency period leading up into the draft. We got some other exciting stuff planned. Follow us on the YouTube channel, the New Orleans Saints at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Tell your friends. Sign up for notifications. We appreciate all of that. Leave comments. It helps out. Helps spread the channel. You can also find our work at NOLA.com/Saints. For our producer, Norman Bell, he's Matthew Paris. He's Luke Johnson. And I'm Zach Ewing. We'll be back next week with more Saints Insider.